Everyone, today I'm going to talk about development of safety metrics of selected greenhouses in the continental United States. So the overall goal of this study was to develop a sustainability score for greenhouse crop production. Primarily that involves fruit and flowers, although some locations also grow succulents, primarily for the purposes of landscaping. The dimensions of sustainability, of course, involve economics, environmental, and social aspects. However, this presentation will be focused on the safety aspect. Some of the reasons why we're looking at this is because, first of all, study of the scale has never been done before. We're also looking at the appropriate participation, and that's in terms of the roles of owner-operators on down to the folks who are newly hired, as well as getting some insight, as there have been some fairly consistent documented failures in sustainability projects. Well, the first step was to conduct a literature review, looking at previous development for metrics in general for agriculture. The most significant find to this was Field to Market, which deals primarily with outdoor agriculture. And this study in particular excludes some of the soft parameters such as safety, leadership management, and adaptability. Some of the applications for developing metrics of the system are for the development of future technologies, as well as assisting growers in cost reduction for inputs. But in this study, we're going to look at the long-term safety considerations. This is an example of a facility that is included in our study. It's not what folks from the Northeast or from the Midwest would typically consider to be a greenhouse. However, it is included in the study, and if you look at, first of all, how the plants and some of the planting objects that they are selling here are arranged, they're arranged in kind of these rows, which is a technique in the selling business known as facing. And you can see some of these are properly faced and some of them are not, where they have the labels pointing out. That's so the customers can come in and they can see what type of plant they're actually looking at, if they can't identify it by its more immediate characteristics. The issue with safety in this particular photo has to deal with lifting. So if you've ever planted using any of these kind of pots here that are seen kind of in the foreground going into the background, you know that you can compact a lot of soil, and these pots and these buckets can become quite heavy. And so that creates issues for lifting, which can potentially lead to a lot of back problems, a lot of muscle pulls, muscle strains. Also, the type of plant that you are handling can also make moving these around not just heavy, but also bulky. And if you're moving, say, some type of cactus or prickly pear plant around, and you're not wearing proper PPE, that can obviously cause different forms of skin irritation, and that these all create safety issues, which are not so much. These all create health issues, which in turn reduce worker productivity and ultimately add to the indirect costs of the operation. This is another view of the same facility, which is located in Orange County, California. One of the things that they could do would be to have a dolly or a cart that would help them, in addition to proper lifting techniques and proper personal protection equipment, depending on what kind of plants you're moving around. That would be helpful, except for the fact that the surface of the floor isn't concrete. It's actually kind of this very refined woody mulch, and so getting a wheeled object in there would be problematic, and so that's not necessarily going to be a solution. And it's unfortunate too, because wheels, they can give you up to 6 times the mechanical advantage, and so you're not putting all of that pressure from weight on your back or on your muscles. This is also a problem too because in a lot of these kinds of greenhouses, you also have customers who are also using the same space as the workers. And when you have individuals using the same space, that becomes, can become quite problematic because if your customers are also susceptible to injury, then they in turn, if they do get injured, that places legal liabilities on the facility. Uh, this is I think more pronounced in this particular facility, which is probably more of what folks think about when they think about a greenhouse. You can kind of see here this area out front gets really wet because you have these booms that will come and water this area every day, and that creates a slip and trip hazard. Again, it's not just water that can create that; it's also you have objects, including hoses that are just kind of laying around. If you come and shop in these areas, which a lot of these facilities do allow shoppers into these portions of the greenhouses, then they can come in and potentially trip over some of these smaller plants or some of these hoses that are just kind of laying around here. The other safety aspect to watch out here for are hanging objects. These hanging baskets, in order to have these on display and not fall, they have to have the proper wire and the proper tensile strength. If you've ever heard one of these fall and hit the concrete floor, it literally sounds like a gunshot going off. So these create kind of a unique struck by hazard. Uh, Safety is unfortunately not really included when we talk a lot about sustainability, and I think everyone to some extent has seen this graphic. Um, Things like education and training are also have not been heavily considered in sustainability. That's something that our research group has researched, and we of course recommend that all agricultural facilities need to have proper education and proper training regarding health and safety, if for no other reason based on the indirect costs, and of course based on uh, the injury rates, which now make agriculture, along with transportation, the most dangerous profession in the country. So in this particular study, we had 100 individual units. It amounted to about 40 greenhouse sites. Uh, I'm showing you data today for 20 of the 40 sites. This map here gives a representation of some of the sites that we looked at. We covered pretty much the whole country except for the Pacific Northwest and for the Mid-Atlantic. Our base sustainability equation, I just want to point out here, does contain safety along with these other factors that we are looking at. In safety, we're looking at previously mentioned fall hazards and trip hazards, but we're also looking at things like flood management and also traffic hazard management. Glass, that's an issue for obvious reasons, although not all facilities have glass in them. In order to develop a scale for these metrics, we're using starting off here with the 10-point scale, with 10 being the highest, 1 being the worst, and 0 not where it doesn't apply. It's not considered in the overall average. So for the Southwest region of our safety metrics, the score averaged just below a 7. Some of the areas they struggled on. One was flood management. The other was use of personal protection equipment. In addition to issues that I have mentioned previously about moving heavy objects, employees were not observed using a proper PPE for handling certain plants. In the Northeast, the trend was kind of similar. We didn't really see a lot of succulents growing there, but again, employees need to be wearing proper gloves. If they're working outside, as some facilities do combine outdoor agriculture on their facilities, you also have to conclude that in your safety plan. Although overall the scores were comparable to the previous region, and Florida, their average was slightly weaker, just above a 6. So it's about a point weaker. There's some issues there, mostly with slip, trip, and fall hazards. They actually had some of the larger facilities there had a lot more water pooling, which is what's kind of pulling that average down. The Midwest did a little bit better. Their average was just slightly below a 7. They had some of the best results in all the categories except for personal protection equipment, which seems to be a problem throughout greenhouses uh, that we observed all over the country. And this is looking at the individual sites that were examined as opposed to the breakdown by region. There's a few ones here that are breaking close to 9. So these facilities are doing much better than the average. But again, overall, I think that there's a lot of room for improvement. This is the overall sustainability score. So this is different from the safety. And again, this orange bar representing the average between the 4 regions, just below a 6. Obviously, that's you know in the middle of our scale, and that could be fairly significantly and I think fairly easily improved. This is just kind of a breakdown of the size of the sites that we looked at, anywhere from small to medium to large to very small. Um, looking at some of contextualizing some of the results here, all the facilities had a concern about profit margin. That's obviously the main driver here. And I think that the best approach to convincing them that they can improve their sustainability and their safety score has to do with understanding that if somebody does get injured, you're going to have a lot of indirect costs. If a customer gets injured, you're going to have liability costs. But overall, though, the best scores happen to be safety. A lot of sites there, none of the sites, interestingly enough, I wanted to point out too, is that they're not using water pumps to remove any of the water. It's all gravimetric. A lot of the greenhouses are built kind of on landscaped rock, or at least on hilly terrain where that water drains. But again, if you have these indentations in the floor where it's collecting and people are walking through that, you're still going to have slip and trip hazards present. Uh, and some recommendations, if I think the main thing is that if folks have a formal training program and are properly trained, and that starts at the top of the owner operators, and it needs to trickle down to the supervisors, the managers, and then to the student interns and the migrant workers. Thank you so much for watching this presentation.